Good afternoon, class. Welcome to this session of modern organization and management. I hope in between gap of 10 days you have not forgotten what we were trying to discuss.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. So let us begin today's session. In our last session, we were discussing regarding types of decision, and if I remember correctly, we had already discussed regarding basic and routine decision and personal versus organizational decision. Now, let us just in 2 minutes we shall try to recall what basic and routine decision and what personal versus organizational decision was all about. Now, basic decision, it represented all those decisions that had to be taken which were or which are unique. They shall be a one time decision, and it also demands large investments, creativeness, and also the judgment of the decision maker has to be very good. All these characteristics together represent what a basic decision is. Now, speaking about routine decisions, now routine decisions, as the name suggests, it represent all those decisions probably which has to be taken in a business organization which are repetitive in nature. Now, because these are repetitive in nature, already how they would occur and how things would be solved would already be known. So, uh, such kind of decision usually requires little deliberation, and they are generally concerned with short term commitments in the organization. So, this is regarding basic and routine decision. Now, speaking about personal and organizational decision, now organizational decisions are definitely made by managers, and when they make such decision, they shall be there in their official or formal capacity. It simply means all the decisions that they take shall be for the organization. And here the decision shall be taken with the main aim of making the organization be better. Now, as against this, personal decisions are wholly made for one single person. Now, decisions may be like, that you decide to binge watch over maybe Netflix, to continue your studies further, or to retire early. Now, all these are examples of personal decisions. Now, all such decisions are taken by managers or those who are concerned with the business in their individual capacity. Now, such decisions, unless like the organizational decisions, cannot be delegated to others. Now, it is all concerned for the individual. He has to take the decision, and the consequences will be also for the individual person himself or herself. Now, we shall see the third one, that is programmed and unprogrammed decision. So, now before discussing the meaning of this programmed and unprogrammed, this classification was provided by one of the management thinker called as Herbert Simon, and he was the person who classified the managerial decisions on the basis of programmed and non-programmed. Now, from the name itself, we would be able to understand what type of decisions these might be. Now, the program decision. Now, these decisions, exactly in the manner of routine decisions, are routine and repetitive in natures. Now, for such problems or for taking such decisions, rules and policies can be well established in advance. And such problems shall be recurring in nature. Now, to give an example, maybe a lot of patients come to hospital. Their information is one of the vital information which has to be kept by the hospital. So, if there are any rules and regulations, maybe the way these records shall be kept would be in a very haphazard manner. So, for such a to not to encounter such problems, the hospital shall well in advance decide how all such records shall be kept. Maybe as soon as the patient enters, they'll have to fill in a form, they'll have to give their personal details, etc. And all the information that is necessary shall be taken. Or when it comes to a business organization, maybe the one who is supervisor in the organization, if at all he finds that some of his employees are reporting late for a work continuously, he might take disciplinary actions against them. Now these are problems. Now problem need not be exactly a threat. Now if at all uh, in the godown or stores, maybe the additional supply that is necessary, it or the stocks might be you know dropping, and until certain level the stocks drop, things would go on fine. But the stockkeeper would have already mentioned a level up until where the stocks can drop, and once the stocks drop to that level, he immediately asks or he immediately places a requisition with the storekeeper. So, and this happens continuously. Now, on the basis of some pre-established alternatives, all these program decisions shall be made in a routine way. Now, this program decisions comparatively, or when we compare it with the unprogrammed decision, they are relatively easy and simple. And also they allow and equip managers for more challenging and difficult problem solving. But then, if we have to speak about the drawbacks of this program decision when it comes to the creative thinking of the managers, usually these routine procedures they leave out a very small room for managers to make choices. Now, judgments also cannot be used, and the freedom of thinking of managers are also affected. Now, these program decisions, usually in a business organization, shall be made by lower level personnel in the organization. And also, this decision they shall be highly routinized, and the decision maker, they'll have to simply recognize the problem to implement the already determined solutions. Now, that is all about the programmed decisions. So, if we have to speak about these non programmed decisions, sorry, or the unprogrammed decisions, now these deal with unique and unusual problems. Now, in such a situation, what happens is that the one who has to make decision will have to make the decisions in a very poorly structured situation, one in which there are no any pre-existing or cut and tried solutions. That is to tell, now deciding whether to take over a sick unit there or how to restructure an organization or whom to promote to the vacant post of regional manager, all such problems are examples of non-programmed decisions or unprogrammed decisions. It simply refers that each problem that shall be classified under the head of unprogrammed decision will be different in nature, would have arise for the first time, and the way in which it should be solved shall be different from one another. Now, to speak about the feature of unprogrammed decision, they are novel in character, they are non-recurring, and also there can be no any ready-made course of action to solve such questions. And from this we can understand that because this non-programmed decision often involve broad and long-range consequences for the organization, usually they shall be made by higher level personnel in the organizations. But then it always asks managers to be creative when they try to solve such infrequent problem, and such situations have to be treated de novo each time they occur. Now, usually when an organization is into a lot of research and development or such kind of firms where situations are poorly structured and decisions being made, those are the organization which hugely encounter such non-programmed decisions. Now, if we have to summarize this programmed and non-programmed decisions in two words, the programmed decisions are routine and repetitive in nature. The solutions shall be offered in accordance with some kind of maybe rule, habits, or procedures. The conditions for program decisions are always highly certain, usually such decision because they are structured and the solutions are well determined, they shall be made by lower level people. Now if we have to speak about these non-program decisions, they are unique and novel in character. There shall be no any pre-established policies or procedures to rely on. Each situation shall be different, and it all most of the times asks for a creative solution. And the conditions for non-programmed decisions are usually highly uncertain. Now, top management usually takes such unprogrammed or non-programmed decision. So these are some of the types of the decision. Now, one more thing I like to tell is that this list is not exhaustive. Now, you might find different ways wherein which the decisions shall be classified. Now, when you refer more and more textbook, you shall encounter with such a thing. So it entirely depends upon you, like what is that you will have to include. Now, usually the decisions would be the ones which would be recurring in nature, the one which we would encounter each time a different one, and the other one is which on the basis of the person, that is, whether the decisions are personal in nature or whether he shall make such decision for the sake of the organization. Usually these are the four different types of decisions that shall be made. I hope whatever we discussed, it is easy, understandable, and that there is no confusion regarding this. Okay. Now, the next topic is regarding the decision making process, or how is that we take a decision. Now, if this particular topic has to be said in the form of a process, the first and the foremost thing that comes in the decision making process is that the one who has this capacity of decision making should be aware that there exists a problem. So if you know you have a problem, then you can solve it. So when you solve or when you try to solve, that is where you start deciding on alternatives that are available. So that makes the entire decision making process. Now, this making decision definitely is one of the difficult tasks. Now, decision is always the product of, evaluation, deliberation, thought, and creativeness. Now, exactly when somebody has to decide, they might not be go in the sequential order that is being displayed. That is to tell, yes, first I'll have to see what the problem is, then I'll have to diagnose, then I'll not, like step by step. After this, I shall do this. But in an unaware state of mind, this is what happens. You encounter with a problem, you see what the problem is, and you'll find different ways how it can be solved. You try to, diagnose each of the alternatives that are there, and which the best one among the different alternatives that you think shall work out best for your organization, you shall be selecting it. And once after you decide this is the path or this is the alternative that the organization shall move on with, you shall try implement. Once you implement, you shall check back whether the decision is proving to be correct for the organization. So now if you go through, this is how the basic step of decision making shall be. That is, first, the one who has to decide should be aware of the problem. Once after that, they will have to diagnose and also, should be able to state the problem in detail. Once after the problem is known accurately, then there can be development of alternatives. Once there are many alternatives, once there are alternatives, then out of the available alternatives, the best one should be selected. Now, once it is implemented, once the best one is selected, it should be implemented, and once after it is implemented, it should be verified time and again. Now here, these arrow marks that can be seen regarding the feedback. This particular arrow mark, this represents that there shall be constant reevaluation of each step, and that feedback shall be taken in every step in the decision making process. And this is how, the managers in the organization shall be provided with useful information because of which their future decisions can be made. Now, this particular model that is being displayed represents the very basic or very raw steps of decision making process in an organization. The first one is awareness of a problem. So, this is very much necessary. Unless until you know there is a problem, you will not solve it. So, if you are not being given with the work of solving, there is nothing to decide on. So, the first step in the decision making process is the manager should be able to recognize the problem. Now, usually when we speak of a problem, they generally, arise because of there is some kind of disparity or difference between what is and what should be. That is to tell what the organization is and what it actually has to be. Now, usually to find the gaps between what is the current state the organization is in and what is the desired state that the organization wants to be, the managers, they should look for problems which needs solving. They have to look for different opportunities and make a decision. Now, when they are into this work, they should see to that importance or emphasis should be on defining the questions in a right way rather than finding answers to the questions. That means whenever you are encountering with the problem, instead of, or the first thing that you'll have to do is that you should be able to define the problems properly. If not, there are chances that whatever measures you try to take to solve the problem itself might be unuseful for the organization. Once you are able to define the problem exactly, later on the answers can be found easily. That is to tell, the managers, they should try to find out what the decision really about, rather than not thinking what the decisions should be. Now this task of finding the actual problem and defining them is definitely a difficult job. Now the managers, when they encounter the problems, they'll have to examine the cause effect relationship in the problem, and it has to be done in a systematic way. That is to tell, now the organization might have been encountered with one particular problem, but then the causes for this one problem might be more than two or more than five. That is to tell, the problem might be the thing that the profits of the organization is falling very much low in the last 5 years. Now, the reason for this might not be one, it might be more than one. The reasons might be that the competitive situation is changing, the operating costs might be becoming higher, there might be inefficiency among the employees, or there might be the chances that the government regulations are changing. Now, the reason could be any one of those or all the four of this, and much more than this also. Now, in order to recognize a problem, a manager is usually expected to monitor the decision making environment, understand the possible cause, and try to define the real problem that exists carefully. So, in brief, this is all regarding how a manager should be aware of a problem. Now, once after the manager is aware of the problem, the next step is to diagnose and to state the problem. Now, what is this diagnose? Now, diagnose, if has to be explained in one sentence, it simply means a good manager who is able to take good decision should be able to weed out the wheat from the chaff. That is to tell, there will be a lot of elements. There are actual problems, then there shall be such situations which in the beginning might look like a problem but actually isn't a problem. So, it depends upon the ability of the manager how well he can differentiate between what actually is a threat for the organization or what actually is a problem for the organization and what isn't. Now, once a manager is aware of a problem, he must be able to state the real problem. Now, he also must try to solve the problem, and remember, a manager has to solve the problem, not the symptoms of the problem. That is to tell, quite often what happens is that the one who has to decide, they will waste a lot of time developing a right answer for a wrong problem. Now, why does this happen? This happens because the opportunities and the problems in the business environment, they do not surface very much easily. Now, what appears to be a problem in the beginning or initially may turn out to be superficially at the end. So, it may not be the real problem at all. Now, the management might see a clash of personalities in the organization, but the real cause may be, well, poor organization structure. Management might see a problem of manufacturing costs and, you know, comes up with the decision to start a cost reduction drive. The real problem may be, well, poor engineering design or poor sales planning. So, weeding out the chaff from the wheat, or differentiating between what the actual problem is, or the ability of stating the problem in detail, is very much necessary in the organization, so that there shall be no any wastage of the two main resource, that is the time and the money in the organization. So if this can be done in an easier way, it would be very much helpful for the managers. And so they have suggested three different questions which are to be answered by a manager, so that the diagnosing the problem and stating the problem might become comparatively easier. So when somebody has to diagnose and state the problem, the first question they'll have to answer is, what is the problem? The first and the foremost thing they'll have to know is what the problem exactly is. That is to tell, as we discussed earlier, what is the difference between what is right now and what should be that. That is to tell, you know, we can give an example. Now, a firm, it might currently have 5% of market share. And after doing, the assumptions about the future, the organization might think that the market share should be higher. Now, the difference that exists between what the current market share and what it wants its market share to be is nothing but the problem for the firm. Now, this is the problem. So, you'll have to come up with the alternatives so that the organization reaches the state what it wants to be. The next question. Now, usually, when we speak about this business, modern organization, and management, we usually would be speaking in terms of, or from the point of view of, a firm or a corporate organization. Now, usually, this organization, they would be huge in terms of doing business, money wise, or product wise, or people wise, resource wise, everything they would be doing huge business. And speaking of this, such dynamic organization, they'll have to deal with numerous problems. So the next question is, which problems to solve? And when the organization has n number of problems, now it shall definitely be not possible to solve all of them. The main reason is that it has limitation of both the time that is available and the resource that is there in the hand to solve all this n number of problems. So once again it becomes very much important to distinguish or differentiate between problems which requires immediate attention and which can be postponed to a future date. Now, one way of solving such puzzle, is always to identify the potentiality of all such problems becoming further more serious in the future. Now, it should also be seen whether the problem would create problems elsewhere in the organization also. If at all, they would be left unattended. So, another factor is about priority in the time constraint that organization has. Now, the rush orders should be executed quickly and should take precedence over orders which can be executed for a month. Now, as we discuss, problem is always a problem. Now, it can be minor ones, major ones. All this has to be solved. But what is there in the hand of organization is that it should be able to recognize which are to be solved right now. Immediate action has to be taken, and which can be pushed back for a further future. In doing so, they should be able to recognize if those problems which are being pushed away would create further more serious situation for the organization. Will they be able to harm any other part of the organization? If the answer is yes, then they'll have to be also solved in the first. Now, the main reason they do this is only because of the constraints that shall be there in the organization. Now, once after the true question, that is, what is the problem? Which problems to be solved? The next question that are to be answered, which makes the stating the problem easier, is the question which is to be answered: what is the real cause of the problem? Why has this problem actually occurred? Now, this has to be answered so that the manager can avoid the danger of prescribing a wrong solution for the organization. And for doing so, a manager should always consider the decision environment very much properly. That is to tell, now the problem in the organization might be a very high employee turnover. Now, this might be due to a lot of reasons. Maybe due to low salary, poor working condition, the supervision being very much tight, or poor schedule, or dissatisfaction with the job itself. Now, manager before taking decision, he or she should analyze all these causes thoroughly before they go on with defining the real problem. Now, before defining, an attitude survey may be undertaken to find out why these employees are leaving the organization. Now, once they do this survey, in a whole, if the answer they get is that most of the employers are complaining about the task monotony and low compensation, then the manager should try to define the problem in terms of restructuring the jobs so as to make them maybe more attractive, rewarding, and also challenging. Now, one more thing that should be kept in mind is that the pressure of events should never force executive to take premature conclusions. Now, instead, they should be having the patience to gather all the facts and analyze the cause for the problem. Now, they should appreciate the message behind the saying, a problem well defined is half solved. That is to tell, you know half information, you do not have time, and because of this, you might jump into conclusion. Might be that conclusion itself might prove wrong. So instead of making or creating more problems to the organization, it is always better to devote some time, wait until all the facts are gathered. Later on, it is better to take decision. Now, in according to Drucker, critical factor analysis always helps in identifying the causes properly. Now, what is this critical factor? Now, this is such a thing which spells the difference between what the actual situation is and what is the desired results. That is to tell, now in a business organization, if one of the mission it goes out of order due to maybe non-availability of one of the essential component. Now this component is the strategic or critical factor. And Bernard speaks that the nature of strategic factor will shift when the problem is defined correctly. That is to tell, after defining the problem, that is non-availability of the component, a new situation is will always arise where the new limiting factor would be obtaining the component, and it goes so on. So here what becomes important is to list out all the possible causes and testing each cause, and also trying to decide whether one is more likely than the other to have created the deviation between the current and the desired state of affairs. Now, this also goes without telling that if a problem has to be defined very much clearly, then the decision maker should always collect as many facts as he or she can and always try to separate these facts from beliefs, opinions, and preconceived notions. Now, this is very much important. A fact in an organization will always include what one perceives, what one believes, what one opinions, and some preconceived notions. Now, when you collect fact along with the fact, what is unnecessary information, all such noises shall be together. So these must, in the beginning, should be differentiated. Now, having said this, it is also, true that there shall always be certain intangible factors which always makes the manager's decision to be based on incomplete information. Now, no matter how much facts a manager has, there shall be some part wherein some guesswork should have to be made, and it is inevitable in nature. So, that's where we'll always have to remember that the best diagnostician is not the man who makes the largest number of correct diagnoses, but the man who can spot early and rectify away his own mistaken diagnosis immediately. And it should also be remembered that where facts cannot be collected, then definitely opinions should be obtained. Now, the manager may be required to use judgment and experience before defining the problems in specific and in measurable terms. So, this is all regarding how diagnose and diagnosing the problem is all about, and how stating the problem can be made. So this makes up the two steps in the decision making process. So the next step is develop the alternatives. And once after a manager be able to diagnose the problem correctly and also be able to state the problem, he should now developing the alternatives should be easy. Now, quite often these executives or managers, they try to take up the first feasible option. Now this should never be done. Now the statement of the problem in a clear measurable term usually enables a executive or a manager to develop different alternatives. But unfortunately, as we discussed, because of the one thing, that is the time constraint, this executive, they shall usually be tempted to accept the first feasible alternative to solve their problems quickly. Now, the there has been a research done by one of the management thinker, that is Mintzberg. He did this research along with his associate, and this particular research has shown that people are often tempted, to seek ready-made solution to problem. Now they try to solve the problem either by looking through organizational records or by seeking expert advice from outside consultancy agents. Now, what happens is usually when the executives or manager takes such a step, it would usually prevent them from, always developing a creative and imaginative alternatives, and it will also prevent them from achieving the best possible possible solution to the existing problems. Now usually many a manager in business, they are competent at choosing among alternatives, have been left behind usually by a competitor who had the creative imagination to consider more and different and better alternatives. Now developing alternative solutions usually guarantees adequate focus and attention on the problem. Now it usually helps managers to fully test the impact of every alternative before it can be finally implemented. Now, it is the manager in the organization who himself have to think imaginatively and also will have to encourage the people in the organization to come up with different kinds of solution for the same problem. And the manager should be able to organize all this dissent in a very effective way. Now, he should be able to allow his subordinates or people in the organization to disagree with what he thinks of a best alternative and also come out with original and maybe untested ideas. Now, what happens in the absence of disagreement is that the decision maker would become what is called as the prisoner of the organization. That is, everyone in the organization would argue forcefully to obtain the decision in their favor. So, to break this custom, the manager should make sure of some decisions which are argued, documented, thought through disagreements. Now, speaking about this, a decision without an alternative is always a desperate gambler's throw. So, it is, worth remembering one of the definition that if there is no choice of alternative, there really is no decision to be made. Now, this is what we had discussed when we were discussing regarding the functions of the management. And this also makes it clear that disagreement alone can offer alternative to a decision. And again, disagreement is needed to stimulate creativity in people in the organization. Might not be at once, but people would always be encouraged gradually to learn a new and different way of understanding, perceiving the organizational problems. So, speaking of this, what is this creativity? Now, creativity is nothing but the ability or the capacity to come up with or to generate, ideas that can be both innovative and functional. Now, functional in an organization becomes very much Important. Innovative, thousands of ideas can be innovative, but if they are not functional in a business organization, it is of no use. So, here, when we speak of creativity, we are speaking about all such ideas which are both innovative in nature and which shall be functional also. Now, speaking of this, developing alternative is definitely important because making a right decision among alternatives is always necessary. Otherwise, what happens is that imagine a situation where there is no alternative. Definitely, there shall be no decision that has to be made. You'll have to implement the one solution that is there in your hand. If it works out, all is fine and good. If not, definitely it is going to add for more problems in the organization. Now, when you have to have alternatives, it always requires research, creative imagination, and ingenuity. For example, to improve the morale of employees, which is negatively affecting the productivity in the organization, some of the alternatives might be considered. That is, the organization might come up with an adequate compensation package. Maybe the incentive schemes would be improved for improved performance. Maybe the job themselves might be restructured so that these jobs become more meaningful and all the way challenging but always interesting. The organization come up with the idea of offering better training facilities. The managers might be sympathetic, considerate, and understanding, and so on. Now, the number of the alternatives that can be taken for bringing more morale among the organization are nothing but the different alternatives. Now, the number of alternatives to be generated usually depends on various factors. That is, time available that is there in the hands of the decision maker, what is the cost of each alternative, and the importance of the decision itself. Now, within these constraints, managers should develop all possible alternative solutions because if at all the correct alternative is not considered and put into action, the problem can never be solved. So, this is what the best among the alternatives can sometimes also mean that among the best available you pick that one which works out best for your organization. There can be possibility of one more alternative which is furthermore better than the ones you have selected, but then you always have some constraints because of which you have picked one such thing which would be probably be proving better for your organization. Now, the development of alternatives is always a creative and innovative activity, and it will always call for divergent thinking. And also, such divergent thinking should be systems thinking. That is to tell, managers they should try to seek solution outside the present realm of their knowledge. Now, they shall be forced to look into all the relevant factors before coming out with one best solution. The past experience and hunches do not always help managers in preparing for future events. They must try to look beyond the organizational barriers. And this always calls that a manager should always be prepared to say, maybe there is a better way. Let's try it out. Now, such a flexible mental framework would help in developing better alternatives as the organization goes by in its lifetime.